Good afternoon. I'm Danielle Shank in the 1011 Now Alert Center with your weekly consumer safety spotlight. So, joining me once again is Josh Planos with the Better Business Bureau. How's it going today, Josh?
It's going great, Danielle. Thanks so much for having me.
Absolutely, and we're glad to have you. So it's mid-April, obviously, which means we've wrapped up the first quarter and are into quarter two. Most businesses kind of understand that quarter to quarter thing. And so Josh has been digging into some new scam data. So Josh, what's the biggest stat that's jumping out to you right now?
Yeah, Danielle, I'd hope that the awareness efforts that we have and that we combine with 1011 on would lead to some positive progress on the scam prevention front. And there are a couple different ways you can look at that, right? You can look at total number of reports. I think it's really important for people to come forward with their experience as much as possible, particularly when no amount of money is lost, because that's truly a selfless act, something that you are doing to protect someone else from needing to go through what you experienced. So, in running reports from January 1st to March 31st, we found that there were 331 scam tracker reports from Nebraska residents that were approved. Importantly, that they were approved because there is a spot check done to ensure that something doesn't qualify as a report that it is not. That is a 116% increase over this time last year, which is concerning. I would say the encouraging part of that story, though, is that the reports that don't involve monetary loss, which are always the most challenging to secure and the most challenging to get people to come forward with, are up 95%, which I believe suggests that the protection efforts that we have, the partnership that we have with 1011, is moving the needle in the appropriate direction because people are coming forward with their experience. They're reporting things, even if they have the institutional knowledge, the foundational understanding to not need to go through that experience in the first place. So it's encouraging that people are coming forward with their experience, and also very concerning that this is even such a prevalent topic and something that affects literally everybody in our community.
hmm So do you think that more scams are happening or that more people are just reporting them?
I think it's both. And I think it's natural that line would be connected. Uh, you know, really, this is something that is not going away. Scam prevention and awareness, right? This is something that is currently happening at a rate at which we've never experienced it previously. So as a result of that, it's natural for there to be more and more reports. However, there's also a lot of confusion around where to report, what qualifies as reportable. Why should I go through the effort of reporting your experience? And I do think that anytime there is an increase in the number of reports, it also suggests that there is an increase in the interest of Nebraskans to protect other Nebraskans. And that is an encouraging sign.
Absolutely. And so what types of scams are the most common right now?
Yeah, I would say right now is tax preparation is still kind of in the throes. There's a lot related to we talked over the weekend about a passport renewal scam that was experienced. There's certainly plenty on the travel front. People getting spring break travel plans in place or summer travel plans in place. And that is something that is top of mind. But really, scams are plentiful at any point during the calendar. And right now, unfortunately, we hear from folks who are being taken for romance and folks who are purchasing products that aren't real and kind of everything in between.
hmm And so how are scammers typically getting in contact with people? Is that through social media, through their phones?
Yeah, great question. I mean, it really is all of the above. I would say snail mail has certainly decreased, but depending on who you ask, that is a way to cut through the noise. Social media is probably the easiest way to scale an effort because it requires very little financial investment to touch many thousands of people half a world away. But we also do hear from folks who are scammed via text message, folks who are scammed via cell phone, via a mobile phone, and that is something that is a cause for concern too. There really hasn't been a huge uptick on the reporting side in any specific mode of communication. It's just that we're seeing more of everything, and unfortunately, scammers are pretty smart enough to know that they're just going to bombard people any way they can reach them.
Absolutely. And so we'll get to some of those examples of some real life cases here in a moment. But you mentioned no loss reporting. Can you kind of just talk about what that means and how that's kind of classified? And is that a sign that prevention's working, that they don't get to that step of sending money?
Absolutely. So within Scam Tracker, there are two fields. One field is the amount of dollars that you lost, and one is the number of the amount of money that was attempted to be stolen from you. Those are two different things, right? If somebody tries to scam me right now for $100,000, but I didn't lose any amount of money, uh, that would be qualified as a report that didn't involve a financial loss, but there was $100,000 in theory that was attempted to be that they were attempting to extract from me. So those are two different fields. The Anytime somebody didn't lose any amount of money, it suggests that they knew when to pull the ripcord and when to remove themselves from that interaction. Maybe they hung up the phone. Maybe they walked away from, that email that they got, or that piece of snail mail that they received. But they knew enough to not go through with that experience. So that is incredibly valuable, right? It shows that there are people who are certainly out there who have a good understanding of what scams that they should be monitoring and what scams that they can avoid. And our hope, right, is when we provide some of these foundational scam prevention tips, that they are put into practice. And anytime somebody walks away from a scam, it's a sign that that knowledge has found its intended target, right? That someone really did internalize what was shared, and they knew that this was the too good to be true opportunity. So anytime we see an increase in the number of scams that don't involve monetary loss, that is an encouraging sign from a community perspective, because it shows that these lessons are taking, and that there's also people out there who are confident enough to come forward with their experience and report it, even if there wasn't a financial loss associated with their experience.
Mhm. And so I'll pull up the graphic that I made once more of the quarter 1 data. But while we're showing that, do you know how Nebraska kind of compares to other states or surrounding states?
Yes, I would say we trail Missouri considerably. There seem to be a lot of scam related activities in that state that are reporting, but we also are well ahead of states like Iowa and states like Kansas and states like South Dakota. So there are a number of reasons for that, right? Some of it might be the relationships that Better Business Bureaus have with their media partners in some of those markets. Some of it might be that there's a system that is better understood, right? We are only reporting on what is reported through Scam Tracker, which is our intake form. But I will say that Nebraskans are fed up with scams, and that is a very encouraging sign. We're seeing this at the legislative level. We're seeing this at the community level. When we go out and we give presentations, we hear it from our constituents and our community members that this is something that Nebraskans are tired of. And one way to really combat this activity is to report your experience. And it's encouraging that Nebraskans are coming forward, even if it costs them some additional time.
Mhm. And so, for anyone just joining us, we took a look at some of the latest scam tracker data trends and showed you a little bit about that. So, now we're going to talk a little bit about some real reports here. The first one that we're going to chat about is a common one that I think I've even had come through on my phone. It's a text many others likely have as well, and was flagged as spam, a Nebraska DMV imposter scam. So, what can you tell us about that?
Yeah, in a way, this is, for many people considered the scam that they most recently remember as something that impacted them and their neighbor and their significant other and people they've never met, right? We all seemingly woke up to, I believe it was a Saturday, when we all received that text message from allegedly from the Nebraska DMV. And it looked at first glance like an official notice. It claimed that there were unpaid traffic fines, and it warned the person that if they didn't pay immediately, that the license that they had could be suspended. Uh, some reported that their vehicle registration was going to be canceled. Some had reported that there were going to be legal proceedings that would result after not responding to that message. There was a link to click on, and fortunately, in what was truly a big win for the scam prevention community here. Everybody seemingly came forward at one time to report their experience, and it was widely reported from seemingly every agency that this was not a real situation. Um, we need more experiences like that, because even though not everybody gets that text message on that Saturday morning, many of us are sharing these experiences all the time, and the only way we can know if they're happening is if people come forward with their story. So this is encouraging that everybody felt confident enough to come forward with their information and say, I think that this is suspicion that the DMV would actually work this way. I don't think that they would be communicating with me in this manner. But I hope that this is something that people can look back on and say, that was a pivotal moment for us where we all kind of banded together, and we knew as soon as we looked up that information online and saw that it was a scam, that we could avoid that situation entirely. We need more experiences like that, but the only way we get those experiences is if people come forward with their stories.
Mhm. And I think I remember it was like a picture too, wasn't it? It didn't even really look that official. It was just like a picture of this long description. And I was like, that's obviously fake report. So if only it was that easy every time. But are DMV traffic phishing scams becoming more popular in Nebraska? And what are they kind of usually threatening when it comes to all of that?
Yeah, we had these reported in Kansas. What's interesting about the BBB's perspective here is we serve a couple of different states, right? So we do hear about scams that seemingly cross the border, and scams that are more specific to a particular market. We heard about these scams in both Kansas and Missouri. So it suggests that there's confusion around how the DMV works. Most of us would do just about anything we can to ensure that we can continue to drive a vehicle, right? Especially if that's something that is essential for your work, or for your family. And as a result, even though it didn't seem terribly coherent, the message that we were receiving, even though it seemed very unique to our relationship with this organization, there were at least some folks who said, this is a small amount of money to ensure that this situation goes away. And for a lot of folks, that is the calculus, right? It is not enough to say, prove it. I need to make sure that this is a real situation before I engage with you. It's that a lot of us just need to move on to the next task. And so, unfortunately, we did hear from some folks who lost money with this scam. But DMV, communication related scams are widely reported. We also hear from folks from government organizations who say that they're being impersonated all the time. So anytime there's confusion around having a point of contact at an organization, that's a really useful element to a scammer, because they know that you don't feel confident enough to pick up the phone and call that person that because this is for many of us the first time we've ever been communicated with by that organization.
Hmm. And so, what can people do to verify a DMV claim without actually clicking that link if they're a little suspicious about something that they just received?
Well, I'm glad you mentioned that, because it's really important that you don't click the link, right? A lot of us feel like we can kind of get out of situations after we've started them. And unfortunately, that's not how malware works, right? It's very important that you do your research on the front end versus just doing something as seemingly innocuous as just clicking on a link, right? That's really all it takes to one, register you as someone who is willing to engage with the scammer, but also it could actually result in you having something downloaded onto your device, which none of us want, right? So a real quick search of DMV text message scam is a really good way to get to the bottom of whether or not that's been reported before. You could go through Scam Tracker. You could look up the DMV. The DMV itself reported that morning that this was a scam that was impersonating their organization. All of these things are really important to do on the front end versus clicking the link and seeing if the organization or the person behind the organization is going to be able to convince you after you get to that intended URL, because that's really problematic. You want to make sure that they're earning your engagement before you willingly engage with any message of any type.
Hmm. Now, if someone went as far as to click on the link but didn't enter any payment info or anything like that, what should they do next?
I'd say best practice is really to monitor your accounts for the next week or so. typically there's not a big, flashing sign that says malware has been, downloaded onto your device. But usually you can tell very quickly whether or not the scammer has infiltrated the device, right? You'll see something unexpected show up on your credit card statement or on your bank account statement. You could also use that opportunity to be proactive and just change your passwords. As we've talked about so regularly, Danielle, there are folks who really go a very long period of time without changing passwords or any of that information, and that's really concerning because, unfortunately, especially when they're synced up account to account, because once you have access to one, you have access to all. So I would say a proactive step would be to ensure that you're updating your passwords on your sensitive accounts, but a really good step to take is to ensure you're monitoring your accounts regularly, which is usually a good way to suss out a lot of compromised accounts or compromised account activity.
hmm And so this Nebraska DMV scam is the first of a few that we're going to be highlighting today, tied to those first quarter numbers showing a sharp rise in scam reports. So if you're just joining us, that's a little bit of the context here. So next up, we're talking about a notable crypto scam.
Yeah, so this is really an employment scam that cryptocurrency. We talk pretty regularly with students. We were at Iowa Western Community College not too long ago talking to folks who were in the auto and diesel job fair, and many of them did not really had not really thought about the amount of information that they pass along to a prospective employer when they apply for any job. Back in my day, Danielle, you had to fill out a physical application, you'd hand it to somebody, and they would take it, and maybe you'd get a call. And now you can apply for dozens of jobs from the comfort of your own home, and some cases through just two clicks of a button, right? So this person got a simple text message. Someone was offering them flexible work commissions that were paid a few times a month. Is something that was very easy to do from home, which a lot of folks are enticed by. And once the conversation moved over to WhatsApp, the job description changed. And this person was told that in order to unlock their daily earnings, they needed to deposit money in cryptocurrency. So they needed to pay in to receive payment. And then a little more, and then a little more, and then the payouts never came, but the requests kept coming. So one thing that's concerning about this report, but also illustrative of this report, is that the point of contact for this victim told them to not tell their bank what they were doing. We hear that a lot, and you could understand why, from a scammer's perspective, that might be very valuable, right? The last thing they want to do is need to feel like they're combating a couple of different people rather than just one person. That's why scammers so regularly tell you to isolate and to not share your information with anybody else. This is not something that a legitimate employer would ever say, but ultimately this victim lost $15,000 in the process, right? Thinking that they were actually going to get paid for a job that they allegedly were doing. And of course, after paying this amount of money, the point of contact stopped communicating with them, and they were left having lost all of that money. So, no job out there would ask you to pay to have the job, right? That's typically the employer's responsibility, is to pay you for the work that you're doing. But that's easier said than done when you feel like you've invested a lot of sweat equity in someone, and you're really, really holding on to the prospect of doing remote work at your leisure.
hmm And you mentioned whether it was here just a moment ago or just through our email exchange, kind of talking about these different scams. You mentioned the WhatsApp that they moved this conversation over to there. So, what is it that scammers like about that app, and why did they move that communication over to that application?
Yeah, I would say there's an encryption related component to that conversation. They know that it's a lot harder to police that activity. Ironically, WhatsApp, I believe, is a Meta company, and we hear from a lot of fraud involving that company because of the degree to which it's very challenging to ever see that money again or to ever police activity on that account. It's one of the reasons, though, it's also a little bit more intimate of a communication style. When we hear from romance fraud victims, nearly all of them would attest that the experience they had was not on the actual profile in question. that may have been the intake, but typically the conversation moves directly to a more intimate form of communication, so SMS messaging or WhatsApp. And as a result, that account really has very little ability to police that activity once somebody has been scammed, because the majority of the scam occurred offline. So there's an encryption, there's a privacy related component, and there's also a more intimate form of communication that's consistent with a lot of the scam reports that we monitor.
Hmm. And with this case, there's quite a few big red flags associated to it. Getting a job offer over text, WhatsApp, asking to pay to unlock earnings. So a lot of red flags that happen there. But can the victim do anything to get the money back, considering it was crypto?
The hope, right, is that they reported through, say that the FBI. FBI has a lot to do with crypto related, investigations. Uh, I can't say for sure what happened with this person, but the time they reported it to us, they were resigned to the fact that they felt like they weren't going to see that money again. But it depends on what came about from that investigation. When it involves cryptocurrency, it's next to impossible to secure that money again. But just to kind of unpack some of the things that you just mentioned, Danielle, all of those things prey on very human desires, right? This person really wanted probably to bypass the job interview process. They wanted to do something from the comfort of their own home. They wanted something that was casual. And unfortunately, scammers are well aware what people are looking for in kind of side hustles or supplemental employment. And as a result, they create this picture perfect window into making money that just isn't real at its core.
Hmm. And so, for those that are just joining us, whether it's on TikTok, our website, or Facebook, we've covered some first quarter stats related to Nebraska and the BBB and scam reports, a DMV scam, and now a crypto scam. So, next up, a multi year case that the Lincoln Police actually just revealed to us this morning during briefing. So, here's a little bit of the background on this one. A 34-year-old Nebraska man was contacted on social media and extorted to paying monthly hush money for years. I think it was about 7 years, mostly through iTunes gift cards, by reading the codes to the scammer. And then after he stopped, new scammers posing as the IRS, the courts, the DOJ claimed that he'd funded criminals and could clear his name by joining a fake entrapment operation and paying more, adding to the losses through cashier checks. And that total loss was nearly $160,000. So, are multi year cases common, and what keeps those victims to keep paying?
Yeah, I would say this was incredibly, disappointing to hear. Right, this is at its core. Right, this person was 27 when this experience started. That is still very, as an incredibly young person to be going through something like this. But it also speaks to the degree of it's National Financial Literacy Month, Danielle, and there's a whole lot of conversations that we could have around some of those foundational elements of financial literacy that need to be baked into education. The same holds true with the civic education as well, right? So if somebody gets conned, somebody who's pretending to be law enforcement, pretending to be a government official, that person might not have any idea how those entities communicate, what channels they use, what would represent a legitimate exercise versus what it is that they are experiencing. So I think that there are a lot of components to that. But we do hear about people who are in years long scams, and typically those roots are incredibly deep, right? You can imagine if you've been communicating with someone for 7 years that you feel a degree of trust with that person. Otherwise, you wouldn't be continuing that conversation. But it also sounded like with this report that there were a lot of different layers of scammers involved, right? And I think for some, the idea of a scam report or a scam experience sounds like one person making a phone call that is too good to be true, and then one person being victimized by it. But really, scams in 2026 and even 7 years ago, they were sophisticated, they were layered, they had resources behind it. Um, this person experienced in real time what it's like to be targeted by a lot of people for a lot of different things. And I'm sure they felt like their world was closing in on them, and they did what they felt was the best thing they could do in that moment. But there's absolutely some psychological devastation associated with this scam,
Mhm.
but uh, it's not uncommon. This is something that happens, and the hope, right, is that when it does, that people come forward with their story, and that it prevents one person from needing to go through it moving forward.
Mhm. How often do you see scammers kind of hand off to a government court sort of imposter situation?
So I think when it involves government, it's not always the case that we hear from people who feel like they've been targeted by a number of different parties. But I would say it's not at all uncommon for someone to be handed off to multiple communicators, right? And sometimes it looks like we've talked about animal fraud in the past, or about animal adoption fraud. And you purchase the product from one person, they tell you one thing, they pass you over to the transportation and logistics person who tells you another. So that's another example of being targeted by multiple layers or multiple parties. Really, the first time you pay somebody, it opens the door to paying forever, right? There's vulnerabilities that are exploited by scammers, and they know that there is a larger payday potentially down the road. The scammer isn't going to stop because they feel like they've satisfied their requirement. The requirement for them will always be more. So we do hear regularly from people who feel like they've had conversations with more than a handful of people who must be involved in this operation. And it's true, they probably were involved with that operation. But you can see why the more people you bring into the conversation, the more legitimate it can appear from the victim's perspective. How could all of these people be, conspiring to scam me out of my money? Well, if it's a scam operation that has, incredible resources behind it and sophisticated tactics, they're probably going to lean on that trust factor that they create by getting more parties involved.
Mhm. And so iTunes gift card is one of the newer methods that we've kind of heard about in terms of payment. What methods are some of the biggest red flags right now when it comes to what banks, retailers, victims should be watching out for? Because iTunes really sticks out.
Yeah, I would say that what a sign of the times, right? I would imagine that iTunes was perhaps earlier on in the process, right, than it is today. Gift cards are a giant red flag. We talk about it regularly. Gift cards are for gifts. They're not meant to pay off outstanding debts. No real business or government agency will ever tell you to buy a gift card to pay them. Just, I mean, again, it sounds so unreasonable when you're able to remove yourself from it. But in the moment, you feel like you're in a trance, right? So the government is never going to ask you for Google Play. They're never going to ask you for gift cards of any type. Cryptocurrency is another big topic as well, right? We hear about how regularly that has been weaponized to perpetuate fraud. And it's because that money moves very quickly. It's very easy to hide it. It's very difficult to get that money back. But I would say that the mode of payment, wire transfer. We've talked, I think, at least a handful of times over the past 2 months about wire transfers being, particularly prone to fraud. But any mode of payment can really be weaponized, and I don't think that there's any one that should tip you off. But if you think about the mode of payment in the context of the conversation you're having, that's usually a good rule of thumb, right? The government is asking for cryptocurrency payment. They're asking for gift card payment. I know this isn't real. You can immediately move away from that situation entirely when that happens.
Mhm. Now, with all of these cases in mind, how can people be a little more cautious online or in their daily lives to protect their personal information?
Yeah, I would say that recognize that fear and urgency are the tools of manipulation. If you're contacted by someone who is pressuring you to act immediately, no matter how dramatic the story is, you should really take a beat and ask yourself, do I believe this situation? And should I look further into it? The odds are that you should look further into it pretty much no matter what the situation is. But if you can at least pause yourself from engaging and moving on to the next step to try to remedy the situation, that's a really good step, because there might not be something that you need to remedy at all. right? Doing a baseline layer of research into what it is that you're experiencing is extremely useful. So even just keying in the keywords that you receive either in a text message or on a phone call or in an email into your Google browser, your AI, chatbot, whatever, means by which you have to access the internet, can get you to the bottom of whether or not that's been reported before. And the hope, right, is that if enough people report it, that you'll be able to see definitively that it is something that you should bypass. But slow yourself down, give yourself a beat, ask somebody else if you're on the fence about something. Scammers want you to act in the moment. They want you to isolate. So the best thing we can do is do the exact opposite of that, right? We bring somebody else, we get in another set of eyes on a situation, and we do our research. And as a result, we're able to hold on to our money a lot longer than otherwise.
Mhm. And now, as we kind of wrap up our discussion on scam stats and some notable scams, the BBB Scam Tracker is a great place to report any scam activity and kind of take a look at what's being reported in your area.
It is. This is a free. It's a free tool. It's publicly available to everybody. You don't need to be tied to your experience forever, and that's one thing that we hear regularly when we give community presentations. Are people feeling like I don't want my name associated with that report, and I don't want that to be tied to me for the rest of time. That's not the way the tool works. You can be kept completely anonymous. We do need to know that you are in fact a person, right? So we have spot checking and we do some authentication to ensure that that report is valid. But don't let name association be a hang up because it isn't one. You can report your experience in less than 3 minutes, and you can protect somebody from needing to go through your experience completely by simply passing along some of your time to share that experience with us. So I would encourage folks to do that. Um, again, we hear all the time from people who feel like their story doesn't matter because they didn't lose any money or they only lost $5. That story still needs to be heard, and that story can still be valuable. And in fact, it's encouraging to hear from folks who didn't lose any amount of money because we know that at least some of those tips that we are, working tirelessly to provide to the public are reaching their intended target and are being used for protection.
Mhm. All right, Josh, thanks so much for joining us here today.
Thank you, Danielle.
Absolutely. So, if you are just joining us, whether that's on TikTok, our website, or Facebook, we will have this interview in full so you can take a look at some of the stats that the BBB has uncovered for Q1, showing that Nebraska has seen a surge in scam reports. So, stay tuned to our website, follow us on all our social media, and be sure to download our app on Roku for the latest news of the day. From our newsroom to wherever you are, we'll see you on the next stream.
1011 News is everywhere. Download our smart TV apps and follow us on social media at 1011 News.